So thank you for inviting me to talk to you with you today. I'm going to give a talk that I've called Financialized Gentrification and Class Composition in the Post-Industrial City. And I'm going to put on a pre-recorded presentation in a little bit. I just wanted to preface this talk by saying that if any of you, or I know that some of you were present at the very first seminar in the Affordable Housing Projects Challenge a seminar series by Martin Konings, where he talked about class in the 21st century. And I've been thinking quite a lot about how my paper compared to that paper, because both of the papers are grappling with the question of class in the context of the increased importance of finance and real estate relative to manufacturing, which has traditionally been the point around which we have discussed class. So those of you who are might be familiar with like Marxist conceptualizations of class will know that it has often been conceptualized as either or along an objective dimension or a subjective dimension. And I think that if you think about Martin Konings and his colleagues' paper, it deals more with class in the context of real estate along that, what we might call that objective economic line, whereas I try to emphasize the class as a subjective political force. I think it'll become a bit more clear when I start. All right. So I hope this all works.
In 2018, a group of working-class tenants in the post-industrial city of Hamilton, Ontario, waged a 7-month rent strike against their landlord, Interrent Real Estate Investment Trust, or REIT. The tenants had 2 demands: 1, repairs to their flats, and 2, the cancellation of a steep rent increase. While the tenants succeeded in having repairs done, their strike did not make the landlord drop the rent increase. In this paper, I demonstrate how the autonomous concept of class composition can contribute to a geographical discussion about financialized gentrification. The study is based on participant observation with Hamilton Tenant Solidarity Network that helped organize the rent strike, in-depth interviews with tenants on strike, and the landlord's financial reports. Class has always been central to literature on gentrification. However, insofar as this literature has considered the working class, it has traditionally done so in a structuralist manner, treating the phenomenon as a rather static and passive thing, whose role in the gentrification process has been that of the displaced. With the autonomous Marxist Harry Kleber, we can say that the working class in this way has been reified and reduced to a victimized spectator to the accumulation and urbanization of capital. In contrast to such reification, autonomous Marxism urges us to put class struggle front and center and conceives of class as a dynamic historical relation and a political force, a force to which capital is forced to react. As one of its key thinkers, Mario Tronti, famously wrote, "We have to turn the problem on its head and start again from first principles," which means focusing on the struggle of the working class. Furthermore, Marxists in and beyond geography have often relegated struggles over housing and gentrification as secondary to struggles at the point of production. Today, however, housing and the built environment in general is more important than ever for capital, not just for the social reproduction of labor power, but as assets, often concentrated in cities, in which wealth can be stored and from which profit can be extracted. In this context, rental housing has by Disarray Fields been described as a new frontier for financialization. This urbanization and financialization of capital forces us to reconsider the working class. Born in a period of capitalist rupture and the working class struggles in and beyond the factory, autonomous Marxism provides useful tools to consider this transformation, or what in this tradition is called recomposition of class. So rather than considering the struggle for housing a displaced class struggle, as David Harvey once wrote, I consider class struggle against displacement to be a primary fault line under today's financialized capitalism. I argue that gentrification doesn't merely involve a class remake of the central urban landscape, as Neil Smith famously put it in The New Urban Frontier. Rather, financialized gentrification and the struggles against it imply an urban remake or recomposition of class. For autonomous Marxists, class is decomposed and recomposed through struggle. Class consists of two dialectically entwined moments. The technical composition of class refers to the ways in which capital organizes labor power and makes profit possible. Political composition refers to the political force of organized workers emerging from the elite into struggle. On a macro scale, we can see deindustrialization and neoliberalism as processes of technical decomposition and recomposition, intended to break the powerful political composition of the industrial post-war working class. If financialized urbanization is key to this recomposition, how does it then affect working class communities and lives, and what does their resistance look like? I will offer one answer to this question by zooming in on the struggle between Interrent Reed and its working class tenants in the Stony Creek Towers in East Hamilton. I suggest that real estate investment trusts and other financialized landlords engage in a technical composition of rental housing. This consists of a spatial reorganization and residential exploitation of working class communities. Originally a gold mining company, the strategy of Interrent Reed is now to mine rent gaps in multifamily housing. That is, to profit from the difference, identified by Neil Smith, between the capitalized ground rent and the potential ground rent. When Interrent bought the 4 high-rises in Hamilton in 2015, the working class, and in many cases immigrant tenants, were paying a rent significantly lower than the ever-booming market rent in the greater Toronto and Hamilton area. Plans for new public transit in the area made this promise of a profitable rent gap even higher. To profit on a rent gap like this, Interrent pursues a repositioning strategy, which involves being, quote, proactive in evicting tenants that are not desirable, end quote. Renovate the property and increase the rent, and thereby, quote, attract a more desirable tenant base. The landlord employs various techniques to meet this objective, of which I will outline the most important ones. While parts of the buildings were being renovated, often to improve this property's so-called curb appeal, old tenants struggled to get necessary repairs done to their flats. Rachel, for example, had been struggling with water damage. It's frustrating, she said, because they're repairing everything on the exteriors, so it looks nice to new tenants. But it's kind of like, I just keep getting a feeling they just want you to go. Such neglect and frustration amount to what Peter Marcuse calls displacement pressure, which might lead to actual displacement down the line. Work that improves the so-called structural integrity of the property makes it possible for the landlord to increase the rent beyond the inflation-adjusted guideline set by the province of Ontario. This puts many tenants at further risk of displacement or forces them to cut down on basic necessities. The tenants on strike, who had paid their rent for years or even decades, found it unjust that they now had to refinance the neglected property. As Bill argued, The new landlord knew they had to put money in it, and as far as I'm concerned, the way they think, well, we'll raise the rent high enough and the tenants will pay for it. And who's gonna profit? Not the tenants, they are. Finally, the landlord attempts to evict tenants by offering tenants buyouts or cash for keys. Like most others, Rachel did not take the bait though. They offered us $2,400, and it's kind of like they would make that back in 2 months, right? I just felt really insulted actually, because there's not a lot of places in this community now, but even outside of this community, that I can get my rent at what it is. In this way treated like a dollar figure, cattle, and commodities, as some tenants put it, the experience of what Peter Marcuse has called residential alienation was widespread. Here it is useful to recall how alienation has been conceptualized in autonomous thinking. In contrast to other Marxists, the aim for Mario Tronti was not disalienation. Rather, the point is to organize alienation and passivity as mass refusal, ripe with political power. This organization is the leap by which a political recomposition of class is wrested from its technical composition. I end by arguing that the East Hamilton rent strike, as an attempt at mass refusal, constituted a leap towards a political recomposition of class in the context of financialized gentrification, although the strike came up against various challenges and mostly failed. First, a crucial step towards political recomposition was the realization that the legal system did not protect the tenants from the landlord's spatial reorganization and exploitation, and that extra legal action, therefore, was necessary. For example, Bill and other tenants had a disappointing experience at an attempted mediation at Ontario's Landlord and Tenant Board prior to the rent strike. The board is working for the owner. That's the way it looks to me. The only real choice we had was to hold back our rent, Bill said. Second, the rent strike became a way to overcome the atomized and privatized way housing precarity is often experienced and to realize its political nature. For example, when Rachel went with neighbors and organizers to Ottawa to deliver a demand letter at the landlord's headquarters, it became a transformative experience for her. It kind of switched it from kind of a private matter to a more public matter. I've kind of been on just this side of homeless a few times, so I've been dealing with this issue for a lot longer than what I actually realized, because I didn't realize it was an actual issue. I just thought it was very like my problem kind of thing, as opposed to no, there's people all over Ontario that are having this issue. Third, on an everyday level, the rent strike for many tenants created a new sense of community, which they described as one of openness, trust, and support, as something really special, a family where people are there for each other and are sticking together. This sense of community reassured Bill about the future. He said, "We weren't really organized right off the bat, but if it ever happens again, we'll be really organized." Finally, the rent strike came up against severe challenges, which limited a political recomposition. Most importantly, not enough tenants joined the rent strike. It was simply not a mass refusal. The reasons for this were primarily fear of eviction and language barriers. The imperative to always pay what you owe presumably also played a role for many. Peter, for example, ultimately joined the strike, but it was a difficult decision. Coming from a family of what he described as hardworking steelworkers, he said, "It's not the way I was brought up. My old man had no use for not paying the rent. You paid the rent, and that was instilled in us. This suggests that the technical composition of financialized rental housing benefits from a morality ingrained in everyday life, making it challenging to utilize that for a political recomposition of class. In conclusion, this paper has attempted to show how the autonomous concept of class composition can inform the literature on financialized gentrification in a way that takes seriously the working class viewpoint and potential of resistance and recomposition. In other words, how class struggle against displacement can be one way to an urban remake of class. Thanks so much for listening.